It was a Monday morning, the kind of morning that feels like a punishment for enjoying your weekend. John was in the kitchen, staring at his toaster as if sheer willpower could make it work faster. His wife, Emily, was upstairs resting, 8 months pregnant and fully committed to her new hobby of binge-watching true crime documentaries. Meanwhile, John's only goal for the day was to survive another round of HOA nonsense without losing his sanity. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was the bane of John's existence. If hell had a bureaucracy, it would look like his HOA, a group of self-important suburbanites who treated lawn maintenance rules as though they were the 10 Commandments. Their latest obsession? A $29 fine for what they claimed was excessive grass height. Excessive? John had measured it. Twice. It was 2.75 inches, well within the 3-inch limit stated in their own bylaws. But logic had no place in HOA disputes. As John poured himself a cup of coffee, a loud knock echoed through the house. He sighed. Nothing good ever came from unexpected knocks when you lived under the HOA's watchful eye. Opening the door, he found Karen, the HOA president, standing there with her clipboard of doom. Karen had the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. It was more like a warning label. She wore her usual uniform: pastel cardigan, pearl necklace, and an aura of unearned authority. "Good morning, John," she chirped with the faux cheerfulness of someone about to ruin your day. "I'm here to discuss your grass violation." John blinked. "Again? I already sent you an email with pictures proving my grass is within regulation." Karen's smile tightened. "Yes, well, we reviewed those photos, and we feel they don't adequately capture the situation." "You feel they don't?" John repeated, incredulous. "It's grass, Karen, not a philosophical debate." Karen ignored him and flipped through her clipboard. "You have until Friday to pay the $29 fine or face further action." "Further action?" John asked, raising an eyebrow. "What are you going to do? Send me to lawn jail?" Karen didn't laugh. Karen never laughed. "Failure to comply could result in penalties," she said primly before turning on her heel and marching back to her golf cart. A vehicle she drove around the neighborhood like it was a chariot of justice. John closed the door and muttered under his breath. "Penalties? For grass? What's next? A SWAT team for untrimmed hedges." He walked back into the kitchen and slumped into a chair. Emily waddled down the stairs moments later, holding a bowl of cereal and wearing her favorite oversized hoodie that read, "I'm not fat, I'm pregnant, but also hungry." "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting across from him. "Karen," John said simply. Emily groaned. "What is it this time? Did she measure our mailbox with a protractor again?" "Nope," John replied. "Grass height. Apparently, our lawn is an existential threat to the neighborhood." Emily rolled her eyes. "You know what? Let me handle this." John hesitated. Emily worked for Homeland Security, an impressive job that usually involved catching bad guys and preventing disasters. But since going on maternity leave, she'd been channeling all that energy into minor neighborhood disputes. Last week, she'd successfully argued down an Amazon delivery guy who left packages in their flower bed. "Are you sure?" John asked cautiously. "I've interrogated terrorists," Emily said dryly between bites of cereal. "I think I can handle Karen." The rest of the day passed uneventfully until John returned home from work to find Emily typing furiously on her laptop while surrounded by stacks of paper. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Research," Emily said without looking up. "On what?" "HOA bylaws," she replied casually. "Did you know they're technically not allowed to issue fines without photographic evidence? And even then, they're supposed to give you 30 days notice before taking any action." John stared at her in awe and maybe a little fear. "How do you even know this stuff?" Emily shrugged. "I read their entire rulebook during my lunch break yesterday." "You're terrifying," John said affectionately. The next morning, Emily sent an email to Karen requesting formal documentation of their alleged violation. Karen responded with vague platitudes about community standards, but failed to provide any actual proof. By Wednesday, things escalated. John came home from work to find their backyard shed wide open and its lock broken. Inside, everything had been rifled through: gardening tools scattered everywhere like some kind of horticultural crime scene. "What happened?" he asked Emily when she came outside to investigate. "I'll tell you what happened," Emily said grimly. Karen happened. Sure enough, when they checked their security camera footage, there was Karen, along with 2 other HOA board members, breaking into their shed in broad daylight. They appeared to be inspecting their lawnmower as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "This has gone too far," Emily said through gritted teeth. John nodded in agreement but couldn't resist adding dryly, "At least now we know why they call it Homeowners Association. They think they own our home." Emily didn't laugh. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and started typing again. "What are you doing now?" John asked nervously. "Filing complaints," Emily replied curtly. "With the police and Homeland Security." John blinked. "Homeland Security?" "They broke into federal property," Emily explained matter-of-factly. "Our shed is federal property?" John asked skeptically. "No," Emily admitted with a smirk. "But my badge was inside it, and that makes this their problem now." For once in his life, John felt genuinely sorry for Karen. The next day brought swift consequences. Karen received an official visit from 2 very serious-looking federal agents who politely but firmly explained that breaking into someone else's property, even under the guise of enforcing HOA rules, was both illegal and incredibly stupid. By Friday morning, Karen had resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons. The $29 fine disappeared from their account without explanation. As for John and Emily, they spent Saturday mowing their lawn. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to, and laughing about how sometimes revenge really is best served with a side of freshly cut grass. John thought the HOA drama was over after Karen's resignation. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The HOA, apparently operating like a hydra, simply sprouted a new head in the form of Greg, the vice president who had all the charm of a DMV clerk and the moral compass of a used car salesman. Greg wasted no time letting everyone know he was now in charge, sending out an email with the subject line, "A New Era of Excellence." John rolled his eyes so hard he nearly sprained them. Emily, on the other hand, was intrigued. "A new era?" she muttered, scrolling through the email on her phone. "Sounds ominous." "It's Greg," John replied, sipping his coffee. "The guy who once tried to fine us for having unauthorized holiday lights. I'm pretty sure his idea of excellence involves mandatory hedge inspections." Sure enough, Greg's first act as HOA president was to double down on the grass violation saga. By Tuesday morning, John received yet another letter, this one printed on fancy stationery that smelled faintly of desperation. It claimed his lawn was still non-compliant and threatened a $50 fine if he didn't resolve the issue within 48 hours. John stared at the letter in disbelief. $50? For grass? What do they think I'm growing out there, truffles? Emily took the letter from him and read it aloud, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Failure to comply will result in further action." Further action? What's left? Are they going to repossess our lawnmower? John groaned and rubbed his temples. "I don't have time for this. I've got actual work to do." Emily smirked. "Lucky for you, I'm on maternity leave, and I've got nothing but time." John hesitated. He knew what Emily was capable of when she set her mind to something. She once convinced their internet provider to waive 3 months of fees by quoting obscure FCC regulations at them until they surrendered out of sheer exhaustion. "Just don't go overboard," he said cautiously. "No promises," Emily replied with a grin. By Wednesday afternoon, Emily had transformed their dining room into what could only be described as a war room. The table was covered in HOA documents, printouts of local ordinances, and sticky notes with phrases like "grass height loophole" and "Greg equals petty tyrant." She even had a whiteboard where she diagrammed the HOA's chain of command like it was a criminal syndicate. John walked in and immediately regretted asking her to get involved. What's happening here?" "I'm preparing my case," Emily said without looking up from her laptop. "Case," John repeated. "Are we going to court?" "Not yet," Emily replied. "But if Greg wants a fight, I'll give him one." John sighed and sat down across from her. Can't we just pay the fine and move on? Emily froze mid-typing and gave him a look that could have melted steel. Pay the fine? Are you kidding me? That's exactly what they want. If we give in now, they'll just keep pushing until we're paying fines for breathing too loudly. John raised his hands in surrender. Okay, no paying fines. Satisfied, Emily returned to her laptop, muttering something about setting a precedent. The next day, Greg escalated things further by sending an HOA inspector to their house. A man named Stan who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but standing in their yard with a clipboard. Afternoon, Stan said awkwardly as John stepped outside to greet him. What's this about? John asked. Grass height inspection, Stan replied without enthusiasm. John gestured toward his lawn, which was freshly mowed and looked like something out of a landscaping magazine. Does this look non-compliant to you? Stan shrugged. I don't know, man. I just measure it. John watched as Stan pulled out a ruler and crouched down to measure various patches of grass like he was conducting some kind of scientific study. After 5 minutes, he stood up and scratched his head. Well? John asked impatiently. It's fine, Stan admitted reluctantly. But Greg told me to mark it as non-compliant anyway. John stared at him in disbelief. You're kidding. Stan shook his head. Look, I don't make the rules. I just follow them. John clenched his fists but managed to keep his cool long enough for Stan to leave without incident. When he told Emily what happened, she practically exploded with fury. They're falsifying violations now? Oh, it is on. That evening, Emily sent an email to Greg demanding an explanation for Stan's visit and threatening legal action if the HOA continued its harassment. She CC'd every homeowner in the neighborhood for good measure. Greg responded with a smug reply that included phrases like community standards and maintaining property values. He also attached yet another invoice for $50. Emily read the email aloud while pacing back and forth like a lawyer preparing for trial. When she finished, she slammed her laptop shut and declared, "This means war." Over the next 48 hours, Emily launched what could only be described as a full-scale counteroffensive against Greg and the HOA board. She filed formal complaints with local government agencies citing harassment and abuse of power. She created an online petition demanding Greg's resignation and shared it on every neighborhood social media group she could find. She even printed flyers exposing Greg's antics and distributed them door to door with help from their nosy neighbor Linda, who loved drama almost as much as she loved gardening. By Saturday morning, half the neighborhood had signed Emily's petition, and Greg was receiving more angry emails than he could handle. Meanwhile, John tried his best to stay out of it, but couldn't help feeling impressed by Emily's determination, even if it occasionally terrified him. You know, he said as they ate breakfast together that morning, I think you missed your calling as a political activist. Emily smirked over her bowl of oatmeal. Nah, this is way more fun. As they finished eating, there was another knock at the door. A softer one this time. When John opened it, he found Stan standing there again. But this time without his clipboard. Hey, Stan said sheepishly. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. You were right about your grass. It's fine. John raised an eyebrow. What changed? Stan hesitated before admitting quietly. Your wife scared Greg so bad he told me to drop it. John burst out laughing while Emily grinned triumphantly from across the room. And just like that, their lawn became the talk of the neighborhood. Not because it violated any rules, but because it symbolized something much bigger. Victory over tyranny? Or at least over Greg's ridiculous power trip. For now, anyway. By the time Sunday rolled around, Greg was officially in damage control mode. The petition demanding his resignation had reached over 75 signatures, and the HOA's group email thread had devolved into a digital battlefield. Residents were sharing their own horror stories about Greg's reign of terror, fines for bird feeders that were too colorful, warnings about basketball hoops being unsightly, and even a $15 penalty issued to an elderly couple for leaving their trash bins out 12 minutes past pickup time. Greg, it seemed, had been running the HOA like a petty dictatorship, and Emily's crusade had finally given the neighborhood permission to revolt. John, meanwhile, had adopted the role of moral support. He spent most of Sunday lounging on the couch with a bag of chips, occasionally offering Emily encouraging words like, "You're doing great, honey," or, "Do you need me to print more flyers?" He knew better than to get in her way when she was on a mission. Emily was in her element. She'd set up a makeshift command center in their living room, complete with her laptop, a stack of HOA bylaws, and a giant corkboard covered in sticky notes and red string that made her look like she was investigating a serial killer. Except the serial killer was Greg, and his crimes involved grass height violations and passive-aggressive emails. "This isn't just about us," Emily declared as she typed furiously on her laptop. "This is about holding Greg accountable for years of abuse." John nodded solemnly. "You're basically Robin Hood, but for suburbanites." Emily ignored him and continued typing. She was drafting an open letter to the HOA board, demanding transparency and accountability. It was equal parts scathing critique and legal masterclass, peppered with phrases like gross mismanagement and abuse of fiduciary duty. She CC'd every homeowner in the neighborhood and hit send with the satisfaction of someone dropping a mic. By Monday morning, the letter had gone viral, at least by neighborhood standards. People were forwarding it to their friends, printing copies to share at work, and even posting it on Nextdoor with titles like HOA Tyrant Exposed. Greg's inbox was flooded with angry replies from residents who were suddenly very interested in attending the next HOA meeting. But Greg wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, he sent out an email accusing Emily of spreading misinformation and threatening legal action for defamation. He also doubled down on the $50 fine for John's lawn, claiming it was now $75 due to non-payment. When John read the email aloud, Emily let out a laugh so sharp it could have cut glass. "Defamation," she said incredulously. "He broke into our shed last week. Does he really want to talk about legal action?" John shrugged. "Maybe he thinks he can intimidate you." Emily smirked. "Oh, sweetie. Intimidation only works if you're not married to someone who works for Homeland Security." And that's when things got serious. Emily decided it was time to bring in reinforcements, not from Homeland Security, yet, but from another source of power, the law firm where her best friend Sarah worked as a paralegal. Sarah had been following the saga with great interest and was more than happy to help draft a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Greg and the entire HOA board. The letter was a masterpiece of legalese. It cited multiple state and federal laws that Greg had potentially violated, including trespassing statutes and privacy protections. It also demanded an immediate end to all harassment against John and Emily, as well as a full audit of all fines issued by the HOA over the past year. When Greg received the letter on Tuesday morning, he reportedly turned pale enough to blend into his beige office walls. By lunchtime, he'd called an emergency meeting of the HOA board to discuss their legal exposure. Unfortunately for Greg, most of the board members were already fed up with him thanks to Emily's open letter, and they weren't particularly interested in defending his actions. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't done yet. That evening, she organized a neighborhood meeting at their house, complete with snacks and PowerPoint slides, to discuss next steps. Nearly 24 residents showed up, including Linda, the nosy neighbor, Stan, the reluctant inspector, and even Mrs. Peterson from 3 houses down who hadn't left her home since 2017 but made an exception because she hated Greg that much. Emily kicked off the meeting with a presentation titled HOA Reform, A Path Forward. She outlined her vision for a more transparent and fair HOA that actually served the community instead of policing it. She proposed new rules limiting fines, requiring board members to disclose conflicts of interest, and mandating regular audits of HOA finances. The crowd loved it. People clapped after every slide and shouted things like, "Down with Greg," and "No more tyranny." Even Stan got caught up in the excitement and volunteered to help draft new bylaws. By the end of the night, Emily had secured enough support to call for a special election to replace Greg as HOA president. She even convinced Linda to run for the position, a move that surprised everyone but made perfect sense when Linda revealed she'd been secretly keeping detailed notes on every HOA meeting for years. Greg didn't stand a chance. Over the next week, Emily continued rallying support while Greg tried desperately to salvage his reputation. He sent out emails accusing Emily of being a troublemaker and claiming that her proposed reforms would lead to chaos and declining property values. But no one bought it. Not after Emily published screenshots of his previous emails admitting he'd falsified violations just to collect fines. By Friday afternoon, Greg finally caved under pressure and announced his resignation effective immediately. He claimed it was due to personal reasons. But everyone knew better. When John came home from work that evening, he found Emily sitting on their front porch with a glass of lemonade, looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. "It's over," she said with a satisfied smile as he sat down beside her. "Greg resigned?" John asked. "Yep," Emily replied. "And Linda's already planning her first act as president, abolishing grass height inspections." John laughed. "You really did it." "We did it," Emily corrected him. John raised an eyebrow. "I didn't do much." "You supported me," Emily said simply. "And you didn't complain when I turned our house into an anti-HOA headquarters." John grinned. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before John added thoughtfully, "You know, this whole thing started over $29. Emily laughed so hard she nearly spilled her lemonade. And just like that, peace returned to their little corner of suburbia, at least until someone decided to put up another unauthorized bird feeder. The fallout from Greg's resignation was swift and glorious. It was as though the entire neighborhood had collectively exhaled after years of holding their breath under his oppressive reign. People were smiling more, waving at each other, and even hosting impromptu block parties to celebrate the end of the HOA's grass tyranny. Emily, of course, was hailed as a local hero. Some neighbors started calling her the Suburban Avenger, which she found both flattering and hilarious. John, on the other hand, was just happy to have his house back. For weeks, their living room had been a war zone of sticky notes and legal documents. Now it was once again a place where he could sit on the couch, eat chips, and watch TV without feeling like he was in the middle of a high-stakes courtroom drama. But while Greg's resignation felt like the end of an era, Emily wasn't quite ready to declare victory just yet. She knew that dismantling years of HOA nonsense would take more than ousting one petty tyrant. There were still bylaws to rewrite, fines to refund, and trust to rebuild among neighbors who had spent years living in fear of arbitrary penalties. "I don't want to just fix this for us," Emily told John one evening as they sat on the porch. "I want to make sure no one else has to deal with this kind of nonsense ever again." John nodded, though he couldn't help but tease her a little. "You know you're starting to sound like a politician." Emily smirked. "Don't tempt me." The first order of business was addressing the mountain of fines that Greg had issued during his tenure. Emily worked with Linda, now officially the HOA president, to organize a full audit of HOA finances. What they found was both shocking and infuriating. Thousands of dollars in fines collected for violations that didn't even exist in the bylaws. Greg had essentially been running a scam under the guise of community standards. Linda called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss how to handle the situation. It was held in her backyard, which felt far less intimidating than the sterile conference room Greg used to insist on. Nearly every homeowner showed up, armed with their own stories of ridiculous fines and passive-aggressive emails. One man named Carl stood up and recounted how Greg had fined him $20 for having an unapproved garden gnome. Another woman named Susan shared how she'd been charged $15 for parking her car too close to her own driveway. By the time Stan, the reluctant inspector, admitted that Greg once ordered him to measure someone's mailbox height with a ruler, the crowd was practically foaming at the mouth. Linda took charge with surprising authority. "We're going to refund every single fine that was issued without proper justification," she announced firmly. "And we're going to rewrite these bylaws so this kind of thing never happens again." The crowd erupted into applause, and Linda looked over at Emily with a grateful smile. "None of this would have happened without you," she said. Emily shrugged modestly. "I just hate bullies." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of reform. Linda appointed Emily as head of the newly formed bylaw committee, a position Emily accepted with gusto despite John's gentle warnings about overcommitting herself. "You're 8 months pregnant," he reminded her one morning as she prepared for yet another meeting. Maybe take it easy? Emily laughed. I'll take it easy after we fix this mess. John sighed but didn't argue. He knew better than to try and stop her when she was on a mission. The bylaw committee quickly became one of the most popular groups in the neighborhood, attracting everyone from retirees looking for something to do to young parents who wanted a better future for their kids. Together, they worked tirelessly to rewrite the HOA's rules from scratch, focusing on fairness and transparency. Gone were arbitrary fines for grass height and mailbox measurements. In their place were simple guidelines designed to promote harmony rather than control. Mow your lawn regularly, within reason. Keep your trash bins out of sight, but don't stress if you forget once in a while. And feel free to decorate your yard however you like, as long as it doesn't involve neon lights visible from space. By the time they finished drafting the new bylaws, even John had to admit they were impressive. This actually makes sense, he said as he skimmed through them one evening. Emily grinned. That's kind of the point. With the new bylaws ready for approval, Linda organized another neighborhood meeting, this time at the local community center, to present them to everyone officially. The turnout was even bigger than before, with people bringing snacks and drinks like it was some kind of suburban festival. Emily stood at the front alongside Linda as they walked everyone through the changes slide by slide. The crowd nodded along enthusiastically, occasionally breaking into cheers when particularly ridiculous old rules were abolished. When they reached the section about refunds for unjust fines, Carl, the garden gnome guy, actually stood up and started clapping like he was at a rock concert. By the end of the meeting, every single homeowner voted in favor of adopting the new bylaws, a unanimous decision that felt like a true victory for common sense. As people filed out of the community center that evening, several stopped to thank Emily personally. You've done more for this neighborhood in a month than Greg did in 5 years, one woman said warmly. You should run for mayor, another joked. Emily laughed but politely declined any future political ambitions. For now, she was content knowing she'd helped make her community a better place, and that she could finally focus on preparing for her baby's arrival without worrying about surprise grass inspections or shed break-ins. When she got home that night, John greeted her with a hug and handed her a bowl of ice cream, the ultimate reward for any suburban Avenger. Well? He asked as they sat down together on the couch. How does it feel to be officially done? Emily smiled contentedly as she took a bite of ice cream. It feels good. John grinned. You know what else feels good? Not having Greg around. They both laughed before settling into comfortable silence, a rare moment of peace after weeks of chaos. For John and Emily, life in their little corner of suburbia finally felt normal again, or at least as normal as it could be when your wife was basically Batman but for HOAs. And honestly, that was more than enough for them. John had thought that life would return to its usual, quiet suburban monotony after the new HOA bylaws were passed. He was looking forward to mowing the lawn without worrying about tape measures or clipboard-wielding inspectors, and maybe even enjoying a weekend where Emily didn't have to draft legal documents or rally the neighborhood like a modern-day Joan of Arc. But, as it turned out, peace in suburbia was a fleeting thing. It started innocently enough. Linda, the newly minted HOA president, decided to host a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the dawn of what she called the new HOA era. She sent out invitations printed on cheerful yellow paper with little cartoon hamburgers on them. Let's put the past behind us and come together as a community, the invitation read. John raised an eyebrow when he saw it. Do you think Greg will show up? He asked, handing the invitation to Emily. Emily smirked. If he does, I hope someone hides the ketchup. I'm not sure he can handle anything spicier than mayonnaise. On the day of the barbecue, John and Emily arrived at Linda's backyard armed with a bowl of potato salad and a healthy dose of skepticism. The yard was packed with neighbors mingling around picnic tables and a grill that Carl, the garden gnome guy, was manning like it was his personal mission to feed everyone within a 5-mile radius. Even Stan, the reluctant inspector, was there, sipping lemonade and looking far more relaxed than anyone had ever seen him. As they made their way through the crowd, Emily was stopped every few feet by someone wanting to thank her for her efforts. One woman even handed her a homemade pie as a token of appreciation. This is getting ridiculous, John muttered as they finally reached an empty spot at one of the tables. "You're like a local celebrity." Emily shrugged. "What can I say? People love justice and pie." Just as John was starting to relax and enjoy his burger, he spotted a familiar figure lurking near the edge of the yard. It was Greg. He wasn't wearing his usual smug expression. Instead, he looked awkward and out of place, holding a plate of food like it was some kind of peace offering. "Oh," John said under his breath, nudging Emily. "Look who decided to show up." Emily turned to see Greg and raised an eyebrow. Well, if it isn't our former overlord." Greg seemed to sense that he was being watched because he hesitated for a moment before making his way over to their table. John braced himself for some kind of confrontation, but when Greg finally spoke, his tone was surprisingly subdued. "Hi," Greg said awkwardly. "I just wanted to, say congratulations on everything you've accomplished." Emily blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Thanks." Greg shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. "I know I wasn't exactly popular as HOA president, and I may have made some mistakes." John snorted but quickly turned it into a cough when Emily shot him a warning look. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Greg continued, looking genuinely contrite, "for everything." For a moment, there was silence as Emily studied him carefully. Then she nodded. "Apology accepted." Greg looked relieved and even managed a small smile before retreating back into the crowd. "Well," John said after he left, "that was unexpected." Emily shrugged and took another bite of her burger. Even tyrants have redemption arcs sometimes. The rest of the barbecue went off without a hitch, until Linda decided it was time for karaoke. "Come on up," she called cheerfully from her makeshift stage in the corner of the yard. "Let's see who's got some hidden talent." Most people groaned or tried to make themselves invisible, but not Carl. He practically sprinted to the microphone and launched into an enthusiastic rendition of Sweet Caroline that had everyone clapping along by the second verse. "Your turn," Emily said with a grin as she nudged John toward the stage. "No way," John protested. "I don't sing in public." "Oh, come on," Emily teased. "You can't be worse than Carl." John sighed but eventually gave in, mostly because Linda had started pointing at him and chanting his name along with half the crowd. He chose Don't Stop Believin', a safe choice, and managed to get through it without embarrassing himself too much. By the time he finished, even Emily looked impressed. "Not bad," she admitted as he returned to their table. "Not bad," John repeated with mock indignation. "That was practically professional." Emily rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. As the sun began to set and people started packing up their things, Linda took the microphone one last time to thank everyone for coming. "This is what community is all about," she said warmly. "Working together, supporting each other, and having fun." The crowd cheered in agreement before slowly dispersing back to their homes. On the walk back home, John turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said slowly, "for all its flaws and all its Gregs, this neighborhood isn't so bad." Emily laughed softly and slipped her arm through his. "Nope, it's not bad at all." When they reached their house, they found another surprise waiting for them. Someone had left a small potted plant on their porch with a note that read, "Thank you for standing up for all of us." John picked up the plant and smiled. "Looks like your fan club strikes again." Emily shook her head but couldn't hide her grin as they headed inside. And so life in their little corner of suburbia finally settled into something resembling normalcy, or at least as normal as it could be when your wife was still known as the suburban Avenger by half the neighborhood. But hey, normal is overrated anyway. If you enjoyed this story about taking down petty suburban tyranny one grass blade at a time, don't forget to like this post. Share it with your friends who've ever had an HOA horror story, or just enjoy watching petty people get what they deserve. Leave your comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this one. Thanks for watching.